We live in a world of Twitter outrage. That is a fact in 2018, and it seems like the latest victim of the online mob appears to be James Gunn, mostly known for his recent directorial efforts in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2. He was fired from Guardians 3 for making off-color rape and pedophilia jokes about 10 years ago. They resurfaced and were used to fuel the fire of the outrage that led Disney to swing the axe and chop off his head, so to speak. Now, celebrities being held accountable and having their feet held to the fire over disgusting things that they've said and done is actually good. I generally am for it. But there's been a real rise and spike in boycotts and firings and people having to go away, and that's not necessarily bad. I mean, look at Me Too, for example. Most of the men who went away in that whole thing, it was better that they just left the industry altogether. Except for Aziz, but that's a different story. As all of this outrage flares and continues, it's becoming more and more clear that publicity is politics and perception is reality. So why'd they fire him? Well, Disney's decision to fire James Gunn was largely reactionary, and that's what makes it seem weird to me, because they weren't necessarily reactionary to his actions, they were reactionary to the reaction of his actions. Now let me explain. James Gunn has been pretty vocal about his disdain and hatred for President Trump on Twitter. Trump supporters took enough issue with that to dig up these tweets from his past and kick up enough of a fuss to make it seem that Disney had no choice but to fire James Gunn, lest they be met with the ire of the internet. And all this led Disney to decide they didn't want to associate with someone who had bad press like this. Now notice I say that they didn't want to associate with someone who had bad press, and not that they didn't want to associate with someone who had made offensive tweets. Disney didn't care about the tweets. They actually made him apologize for them a couple months before they announced he was directing the first Guardians film. And they'd clearly forgiven him for it because they hired him. They didn't mind back then, they don't mind now. All they care about is the public's perception and the public's reaction. What about Roseanne? So the moment that James Gunn got fired, the comparisons to Roseanne kept coming in. And there are a couple things to legitimately compare it to. They both worked for Disney, they both made offensive tweets, and they were both fired because of those offensive tweets. But people get into this thing of saying like, well, why was it okay to fire her? And why do you not like the fact that James Gunn was fired? If you're for this, you should be for that. Whilst James Gunn's jokes about rape and pedophilia are horrible and disgusting and don't agree with them or support them in any way, it doesn't necessarily indicate that he's a rapist or a pedophile. They're clearly some kind of dumb attempt at humor. But Roseanne's tweets and Roseanne's actions kind of indicate she is actually a racist. Plus then you've got to look at this whole comparison of shock humor and vulgarity versus actual discriminatory racism. But hey, since then Roseanne has come out and said she didn't realize the chick was black, so who knows at this point. But Roseanne, to be honest, seemed quite unhinged. James Gunn in his response seemed quite put together, but we'll get to that later. How bad is this epidemic? Well, this year alone, the Twitter outrage machine has taken down, or at least tried to take down, many big celebrities, and not all of them I completely disagree with. Sam B in the news for her controversial words towards Ivanka Trump. Roseanne obviously in the news about her racist tweets. James Gunn for his rape and pedophilia stuff. You had Dan Harmon for his sort of pedophilic humor pilot TV show. Joe Walsh for being on the Sacha Baron Cohen show, telling kids they should be armed with guns. Milo said that journalists have it coming when it comes to violence. Representative Jason Spencer, this congressman, flashed his ass and said the N-word on Sacha Baron Cohen's show. In that case, I actually agree with him getting told to resign. Even weird stuff like conservative actors like James Woods got dropped by his agent for being conservative. Now, I don't know how I feel about that. Some instances, I totally agree with it. Milo and Roseanne, for example, don't seem like people who really deserve a platform, but generally I think these things need to be looked at case by case. But can you win this game of tweets? Well, yes, you actually can win, but not without taking a few blows here and there. It seems to me to initially cop a lot of flack, just take the hate, accept it, make a considered response and apology, and just take a bit of time to step back, let the news cycle continue, wait until all the media publications move on to the next thing that Trump tweeted about, then slowly try to come back and you might be fine. Maybe. Just maybe. I think generally the more calm, earnest, and apologetic that you are in your response, the more willing people will be to forgive you and to forget about what you did. Joe Walsh, for example, he's this big ex-Republican senator, I think, and he went literally on TV and advocated for the arming of 4 to 12-year-olds with guns, which is objectively crazy. But in his response, he didn't get angry. He didn't yell at Sacha Baron Cohen for tricking him and making him out to be an idiot. He just said, look, I got goofed, I got tricked. Then weeks later, high-profile liberals liking his tweets because he's an anti-Trump conservative. It's definitely a game you can win. It just comes down to how you respond, what kind of response you give, and what kind of actions you take following the outrage. Look at Roseanne, for example. Her reaction to the scandal was almost worse than the scandal itself. She blamed it on Ambien, she went on this weird rant, she was clearly unhinged, and she didn't give any kind of incentive to Disney to rehire her. Look at James Gunn, for example. His response has been completely different. Immediately, he condemned the tweets once again. He didn't try to excuse his actions. He basically said, I'm a changed man. I've grown more as a person. A lot of people, I think, can sympathize with that kind of answer, and they can say, well, yeah, I get that. I see that. I have nothing wrong with that. But that's what makes it even weirder that Disney still fired him. Look, they're a big corporation. I understand them making that decision. I understand them putting their foot down because it comes down to revenue, profit, advertising, marketing, etc. So I understand their decision. He handled the scandal so well and was still immediately cut off. I would have thought they would have given it a bit of time to see how it played out. People like Sacha Baron Cohen or even Donald Trump, who just continually, perpetually surround themselves with scandals, with controversies. There are so many happening at once, you don't know which one to focus on, and they kind of always get away with doing this controversial, crazy stuff because they're always doing it so unapologetically. So there's a way to win it, there's a way to just say screw the rules and keep doing it forever, but at the same time, sometimes you play your cards right, you do everything the best you can, and you still get fired. So the seminal question is, will James Gunn return? Oh, well, I don't really know. A lot of people have come out in support of rehiring him, have come out in support of how much he's changed. The Guardians of the Galaxy cast released this big statement and they all signed it basically saying, we think he's changed, we think that he's a different person. Chris Pratt, the biggest star in Hollywood right now, literally said point blank on Twitter, I would really like it if James Gunn was rehired. That to me seems like a lot of pull, especially from within Disney. You know, the biggest cast, well, one of the biggest casts they have apart from the Avengers, I guess. Just as the outrage taketh away, perhaps the outrage giveth. I mean, if Disney fired him because they thought it was such a PR nightmare, because there was such outrage about his tweets, maybe they'll rehire him because they think the backlash to him being fired was big enough to reverse the move. Basically, I think there's a plausible path of events where Disney looks at the revolt from the cast, they compare that to, okay, how many people were disgusted by the original tweets to the point that they won't buy a ticket, and they say, maybe a different director wouldn't sell quite as well as James Gunn, come to the conclusion that rehiring him would be a better PR move than to keep him fired. Personally, I would like him to be rehired only because currently the way he was fired portrays that you are only ever defined by your past actions, your past words, your past mistakes, and that's a real shame. And if it doesn't imply that, then it kind of shows that you're only ever defined by how many people are currently outraged at you on Twitter. Either of those two messages, I don't think is a very nice one to send out into the world. So I would prefer if they just said, he's made mistakes, he's made a conscious effort to change, he considers himself a better person, them taking the stance of, you know what, people can redeem themselves, they can go through redemption, they can change. That is a pretty positive message, and I really hope that they end up rehiring him, if only to send that message out into the public. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. While we wait to find out, why don't you go and check out some of my previous videos? I'm sure you'll have a good time there. Maybe not as good as Guardians 1 or 2, but maybe you'll enjoy it more. So go through, look at my old videos. Best way to do that is to subscribe, like this video, check out some of the links around me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you coming along for this ride and figuring out my content with me. So thank you. I will hopefully see you in the next one. Goodbye.